Well, hello and welcome to Illumination Podcast. My name is Nick, and today's topic is a creative path to awakening.
Hello and welcome to Illumination Podcast with Nick and Kisma, bringing you ancient wisdom for modern day success so that you can have the mindset to get your life and business set.
As always, thank you for tuning in. And if you're new to the podcast, take a quick second to hit the subscribe button in iTunes, SoundCloud, or Stitcher. If you want to get the inside info for this and every episode, as well as some free gifts, go to illuminationacademy.net/podcasts. And now let's dive in to get your mindset for your life and business set. Well, hello, Kisma.
Hello.
And you are in New York. How is New York?
I am coming in remote. New York City is fabulous. I love this place. Yeah, I've been here for a few days and getting some things set up because little Miss Zoe's moving here. And it's just been great. You know, it's like I used to live here. So it's my old stomping grounds.
What's your favorite part about New York?
It's got to be the architecture. You know, I just took a walk this morning up and down Riverside Drive, and it's, you know, we're talking about creativity, and I'm so excited about our guests, which we'll intro in a moment. But, you know, I look at these buildings and it's like they come alive. They're so creative. You know, some of them are pre-war, and it's like you can just feel the essence of the creative aspects just coming out of the stone and out of the brick. And I love the people. Like, I'm such a fan of New Yorkers. They're just like, tell it like it is. If you're nice to them, they're nice to you. They're really helpful. I love this city.
Well, I can't wait to visit.
I know.
Can't wait to come out and see it for myself. Can you believe that I've never been there?
That is so bizarre.
It's so
You've
weird.
Been everywhere.
I've been all over the world, but I've never been to New York. And truthfully speaking, I'm a little ashamed of that. Like, that's such an iconic city. I feel like I should have at least, set foot in it,
Now, do we use the word shame and should on our podcast? No.
We don't. We don't. However,
I should have done like 20 sit-ups this morning, and I didn't. So what's the point?
Well, let's just say I can't wait to get there. I can't wait to visit and see what that's all about. And how much cooler to have you to show me all around.
Absolutely. It is really a cool place. It is, I don't know, there's something about we're energy people, and the energy here is like, it's definitely up and up. People take action in the city. So it's a very first chakra, root chakra kind of place. And, on the other side of it, I'm seeing lots of homeless people, which is somewhat disturbing and sad. So I'm sort of formulating a system because obviously to give to every person that is asking is not going to work. And I know we've talked on other podcasts, possibly we'll do something again on prosperity, but creating a system of like how to serve in a really focused way the homeless population here, and at least just give some ideas to Zoe because she's the one that's going to be living here.
Yeah, that's so important. Like, it's just so incredibly important to have that. I just think as a part of your everyday life is making sure that give back is always a part of that.
Yeah.
Is it as many homeless as we see here in San Diego? Is it on that level?
Yeah, that's a good question because downtown San Diego has many, right? I would say I haven't seen, like in San Diego, we'll see these pockets of people like communities, which can be a very beautiful thing and a very troubling thing. Here, it's more distressing to me because there's just single people on their own, but many single people just grabbing a bench, or there's a church right around the corner, sleeping there, asking for money. There's a lot. It was a little bit surprising.
I see. So like more all pervasive.
It's more all pervasive.
Yeah. Well,
Yeah.
I love that you're thinking that way, and I think that's cool. Like, and what a beautiful use of creativity of, how can I, or what can I do to serve in a greater way and to serve in a way that is really and truly of the highest.
Yeah.
So that's cool. It kind of ties in with our topic for today, and super excited about our guest. It's been a little bit since we've connected, and so I'm really excited to reconnect with him. Kisma, I was wondering if you could do and introduce our guest and bring him on.
Yes, our very, very special guest is Albert Flynn Desilver, who is an American poet. Do you love that word? Like the poets are still alive.
It's definitely one of the coolest job titles.
I know, right? Novelist, speaker, workshop leader. And we can say from firsthand experience, like an all around amazing human, like really is true to his craft, to his creativity. And all of you are going to hear so much about him and really get to know who he is when we start talking. But the very special thing going on right now is he's the founder and creator of Writing as a Path to Awakening. And that is so rich, right? I mean, when you think of all the writers in history that were just exuding their souls on paper, this is what Albert's all about. And this Writing as a Path to Awakening is a workshop, is a retreat, and now is an interactive book, which we'll be talking about. So let's just bring on Albert and we'll dive into so much. So welcome, my dear friend. How are you?
Hello, Kisma and Nick. What a joy.
Oh, so great to have you
delightful.
Here. Yeah.
So delightful to connect with you again.
I know it's been like a couple years or a year and a half or something that we met at the Sedona Yoga Festival.
That's right. The highlight of my 2 years going to that event.
We always do something when we show up, that's for sure. And then we got to see you in San Diego last year. And I just, I want to dive in because I know that one of your books, Beamish Boy, Nick, did you read that as well? I know I devoured it and I was like, what the heck? Because it was like, you like the real hippie. Like, I feel like you're the real deal. So
well, post hippie, maybe.
Yeah, right. I know. It's a different world right now for you, but could you share a little bit about what the Beamish Boy is about and how it kind of related to you arriving to this really beautiful life that you have now?
Oh my God. Okay, you got a few hours?
I know, right? Yeah, in a nutshell.
We'll give you the compressed version. Hopefully the poetically compressed version. So anyways, Beamish Boy is the memoir. So I had been writing poetry for about 15 years, teaching as a poet in the schools. And my personal story just kept rising to the surface and wouldn't let go. And somehow poetry for this particular story, for delving into my personal story, my history, it couldn't contain it in the way that I needed it to be contained or expressed through poems. And I had been a fan of memoirs. I was fascinated by the work of Mary Carr and Augustine Burroughs and people like that. And I thought, well, what would it be like to write prose? What could I even complete a sentence after just writing poetry for so many years? And so I like to set pretty challenging goals for myself. So I thought, why not? I can write this for myself as a practice of exploring what's there. Like, what is my story? What's still resonant inside me? And not just my idea of my story, but I really wanted to get into the truth of it, the uncomfortable, gritty, embodied, difficult, sticky, shameful ick of it. I just wanted to get in there and like write into it and get it out, get it out on the page.
Right.
And so I did.
And you birthed that book.
I did. And I just, it was an interesting project. I wasn't sure how I wanted to get it out in the world. And I kind of did a hybrid publishing experiment with it. Mm-hmm. And it got some great reviews and people really seemed to enjoy it. And it just really tied in very well with everything that I had been thinking about and moving towards spiritually.
Right. Do you feel like you went through many different types of experiences in search, like so many people? Because the years that Beamish Boy, covered from the time you were a little boy, right? Till what age?
About age 6 or so till age 30.
Yeah. Okay. So a period of space, but many people were diving into music and poetry and drugs and, just hanging out on whatever sort of the Woodstock kind of lifestyle, I feel like it is. Do you feel like that was all like in search of just this higher self and perspective that you now are tuned and tapped into?
I do. Yeah. I mean, I think about, like, in particular, the only times I ever had access to the ecstatic or to the divine was when I spent time in nature and it was still a little bit unconscious. And when I was at Grateful Dead concerts, and usually pretty blasted, but dancing my ass off and feeling like completely unified with this crazy community of creative freaks. But it wasn't, it wasn't like a sustainable, grounded sense of spirit. I mean, at times you feel spirit flowing through you, but it's totally ungrounded, right? And disconnected from any actionable, sort of clear, focused intent with the world. I mean, I wasn't really that connected to my own creativity at that time, in my 20s. But I would say it was a huge influence for sure.
Yeah. Wow. Nick, can you relate to any of these experiences from your past?
Do you want me to get into all that? Yeah, I mean, for sure. It's like, to me, it was like a disconnect. It's like something I'd go away to do or escape somewhere to have this, quote unquote, spiritual experience, to see myself in a different perspective. And that was always really nice. But I was like, I want, part of me was like, I want more of that. And also I want to have a life. Like there's other things that I want to do in my life. And so really bringing those two together in an artful way is also ultimately what we wound up teaching and sharing with people, because I just think like that's the most important thing, is like, how do you bring that sense of creativity, that sense of spiritual connection into everything that you do in your life, in every way, like whether you're, whatever your occupation may be, whatever that, bring it into your family and every different aspect of it. I just think that's the coolest thing.
I've been thinking a lot about this lately, that my parents were actually, even though, I grew up in an alcoholic and fairly traumatic childhood environment, there were a lot of books around, and my parents were always reading, and we were going into New York City. Hello, New York City.
Yeah.
Because I grew up right outside of New York, and we would go to the theater and we would go see shows and we would go see ballet. And it was all just kind of a little bit of a blur for me at the time. But now as I'm older, I realized that had such an influence. And at some point I realized that for so long I thought, well, I could never do that. I could never be an artist. I could never be a producer. And my parents were such great consumers of art. But at some point I was just like, you know what? I want to participate in this. I want to produce. Why is it XYZ person? Why do they get to express and have the stage, have a place to perform and share their ideas and their visions of the world? And, that came through repeated exposure and inspiration.
Yeah.
And spiritual practice, honestly.
Right. Can you tap into about what age you were when you made that pivot of, I want to create, I know I can do this, or even if you weren't sure, it's like you were really ready to give it a try?
I think I'd have to go back to high school, and I somehow wound up helping out with the yearbook.
Oh, cool.
Getting a camera. My dad got me a camera, and then I went on a summer trip to Europe that was sponsored through the school, and took the camera and just took like really pretty terrible, ordinary pictures, just documenting the experience, just snapshots. But then when it came time to go to college, and I really couldn't get into many colleges, so I wound up at this little college in Ohio that would have me.
Oh, right.
And so I went there, and, the first thing they ask you when you get there is, what are you going to major in? What's your major? And I was like, major? I don't know. I just want to be here and explore and experiment. But I thought, well, can I major in taking pictures? And they said, well, yeah, that's the art department. And so I majored in art, and then transferred soon after that to the University of Colorado in Boulder.
Okay.
And they had an extensive BFA, Bachelor of Fine Arts program at CU. And I got into that and wound up in the photo historian Alex Sweetman's class. And I mean, this guy knew more about photographs than I ever thought possible. And he had such an interesting passion for it. And it just became contagious. And at some point I was like, I would like to do this. I would like to experiment with this and see if what's coming through my eyes and I reflect back is of any interest. Am I looking from a particular viewpoint or angle? And so it went, by my junior year, I did a semester in Africa and took hundreds of rolls of film. And, when you shoot that many rolls of film, you're bound to get a couple of good pictures.
Yeah, right.
And so I started to see, that's like the little win, right? You get a little win. You're like, oh, wow, I can't believe I made that. That's pretty cool. Mm-hmm. And so that carries you to the next picture. Mm. And then later in my life, it carried me to the next word on the page.
Right.
But that's where it sort of began.
That's cool. And as I recall, in Colorado, there were many significant turn of events. Is that correct for your life?
That is very correct. Yes.
Any
the
that you... Yeah, go.
I woke up handcuffed to the hospital bed with no idea how I got there and arrested for assault and battery.
Oh.
And so that was part of the drinking. Was still doing drinking at that point. I was about 22.
You were still in college?
Yeah. Let's see. I might have just graduated. Because this was 90. I graduated 91. This was 92. Yeah. So I'd been trying to quit drinking for a couple of years and was failing miserably. And then it just came to this really near-death experience. I mean, I wasn't really expected to survive the alcohol poisoning. Oh. And somehow I did. And I sort of came back from that and was like, wow, I'm not going to get another chance at this. This was my second hospitalization from alcohol. And the first time I was run over by my best friend after I passed out in the driveway.
And that was in the book, right?
Yeah.
That. Mm-hmm.
And so, I had the meeting with the Boulder County assistant DA, and she was like, she just looked at me so soberly, so intensely, and was like, you got to stop. You have your whole life in front of you. Don't do this. My uncle killed himself and you can't do this. I mean, it was like I was her own son or something. And I saw this plea, this sort of almost desperate plea. I now see it as like this divine plea. I see her as an angel, with this incredible intent, don't do it. Don't kill yourself. And I'll never forget that because I did quit drinking and I went, it helped. I was required to go to a county-sponsored sort of rehab program.
Yeah.
And then AA and all that stuff. But that was a big turning point.
Yeah.
This is a pretty common theme, I think, in the sense that these pinnacle moments is like they're so often preceded by something really traumatic like that. And I'm curious, your thoughts about, is that... why do we do that? Why do we feel like it just has to get so bad, or we have to do something or have such an intense experience to be like, oh, I'm here and I can choose to stay here and actually there's a lot more to life than this. I don't know. What are your thoughts around that?
It's such a great question. I mean, some of us are very stubborn animals. We're just and this was in my family too. My sister had 3 DUIs and wrecked 4 cars and was arrested multiple times. And now she's still alive. I think it has something to do with that level of, for me, I just speak from my own experience that for me, it had something to do with this level of trauma, this lack of self understanding, this lack of self-worth.
Mm-hmm.
I really thought I didn't have a place in this world, that my voice didn't matter, that I had really nothing to contribute. No one had ever really told me that. Mm. And I was just so embarrassed and so kind of moving through this world, just completely consumed in shame that I thought it just wasn't, and it just took these extreme reminders. It's a very clear and obvious call for help. And then it took me I mean, after this, so I get sober, and then I move to California to start anew a year later, and then I wind up in therapy.
Yeah.
And instead of like joining this, what I thought was a therapy group, it turns out it's a psychedelic therapy cult.
And that was just everyone. You've just got to read this. Like it is
sucked into this thing, and it's we end up doing just insane amounts of psychedelics, and there's no boundaries, and the teachers are sleeping with some of the participants, and it's just like a mess.
Yeah.
And you talk about extreme situations. I mean, it was really like, I thought I had done psychedelics being on tour with the Grateful Dead. Oh boy, that was nothing. Hanging out with this group, in a yurt in Northern California, blindfolded with really bizarre music.
Dude, we really, honestly, whoever's listening, like this has got to be the next TV show. I mean, it's just like too good. Oh my gosh. But
I don't think that's, it's not the case for a lot of people. A lot of people will get, they get the message after a while.
Well, I feel like you like worked through karma for 1,000 lives for every family member or something. It's just like, it's fascinating to see because you've so openly shared these experiences, which I really love. And then to see you now, just like, you landed on your feet. And I love that you're always seeking, but you have such a great sense of who you are. And that is,
so much of that comes from gratitude, really just every day being so grateful to be alive and to be awake in this body, really feeling into my senses and my experience. And, and it's been such a long, crazy journey. And I just know it's like, now it's all about keeping it simple.
Simple is good.
Keeping it simple and ground out in love.
When you go back to those days and the therapy of psychedelics, what was the drug of choice that they used? Was it like an LSD or?
God, they had it all. I mean, they started with MDMA, and now there's this whole movement.
There is this whole movement.
It's practice.
Yeah,
it is. Back then, it was still a little bit of the Wild West and very much illegal. But yeah, MDMA, ecstasy, mushrooms were my favorite.
Right.
Yeah, I mean, if you ever want to go to like the complete, to die and go to the other side of emptiness, where, that which makes words, language being possible. Just take several grams of mushrooms. Not recommended, really. I mean, without like a really grounded container.
Yeah. Well, it leads me to, like you said, there's a movement. I mean, there's a book out there, Stealing the Fire. I don't know if you've read it. I found it very fascinating, and it's a lot of the sort of reference to Burning Man and the drugs and the MDMA. For someone who's gone through so many different iterations of yourself in a way, or so many different experiences, was there value? And this is not, I'm not saying to people go out and do this in any way, shape, or form. But I'm curious if you think there is real value, or if it's just another method to take ourselves out of the real work.
Yeah, this is such a crucial question. And I struggle with this quite a bit because I have friends who do, the ayahuasca thing is so big right now.
Right.
And people do it kind of recreationally. And I have very mixed feelings about it. On the one hand, I probably never would have experienced these other levels of consciousness and awareness if I hadn't done that work.
Right.
And then on the other level, it is a great distraction. And, I started seeing people in our community, doing these ayahuasca sessions like every weekend. And it's like, I got to a point after, I think it was about 2 or 3 years I was involved with this group, where I went to the other side and I was like, whoa, I'm back. I don't need to do that anymore. Like I've seen it, and I'm here, and I've seen the light, and it's all about love.
That's a great thing. And I suppose too, I mean, Nick, you might want to shed your thoughts on this, but I think when people go through these experiences, like what's really in you is oftentimes what is presented. Nick, you and I had an experience in India. It wasn't really drug use, but it was like a rebirthing process kind of thing. And it was fascinating to watch how everybody's experience played out, what they were seeing, what they were feeling. But I would just say that's, kudos to you. I mean, Albert, you're like, through much of your life, you're searching, but there's such a seed of love. And perhaps that was the inspiration to come back and be in action and serve the planet from that perspective.
I think that's right. Yeah. I mean, there's no doubt that those experiences are very profound. And then, as I got deeper into meditation after this experience, into the 90s and early 2000s, I was just blown away by the power of sitting still and the power of mindful meditation. And I started doing long retreats and intensive silent retreats. And I would have all kinds of like really trippy, unbelievable
interesting, right? Yeah.
experiences, just energy, Kundalini energy explosions, and a lot of energy movement in the body and a lot of releases. And I didn't see it as separate from any of that work. I mean, maybe that work stirred it up and allowed it to move. But I am now, I feel like the most powerful and the most difficult practice is just being still, just being silent. It's truly a revolutionary act in our culture.
Yeah, it's a noisy world just to start with, and then all of that, so much going on in just our own heads and all these things that we carry with us. I just, that's such a beautiful way to put it. It's the one of the greatest revolutions ever, is just to be quiet for a minute.
It's so true. I mean, you think about just the noise of I mean, not just the internet, but the news cycle, and and it all translates. It all gets in our heads and in our bodies. What we expose ourselves to, we absorb on some level. So it's like, how do we attend to the sacred without denying some of the realities of the world, the physical world?
Well, and that sounds like, and correct me if I'm wrong, but that really sounds like, what you're talking about with utilizing creativity in the creative process as far as awakening. It's not about like necessarily a spiritual experience per se, as much as it is about like really bringing that into everyday life. Do I have that right? Or tell me a little bit more about that.
Yeah, I mean, creativity it's not something separate from our daily experience. It doesn't have to be. I think some people try and limit themselves by saying, "Oh, I'm not a creative person," or "I can't write," or it's just these voices in our head that fixates the identity in a limited way. When the truth is, we are creative geniuses. That's our true nature. And this isn't magical New Age thinking. This is the truth. Like, we're always creating. This body is constantly, spontaneously building cells and nerve endings and changing and growing. And so that's our creative essence is embodied, and the same with the mind. It's just being, I see my job as an artist and a teacher to just simply remind people of that. And that's really what the book is all about. That first, get in the body, reconnect with this creative truth of who you are, and then play. Try. Sit your ass down in the chair. If you want to write something, write something. Don't think about it. Don't talk about it. Just do it.
Yeah.
That's right.
It's so perfect. I mean, on one hand, with the level of electronics that we have and our children have and our grandparents have, everyone has these electronics, and it's exciting, and all the information is right at our fingertips. Yet, how many people are really reading a good book? how many people are wanting to sit down? The question.
Hopefully lots.
I hope so, right? The question that keeps coming through my head is, what would the world be like if there were more poets?
Mm-hmm.
It's like, it's this mysterious art form in a way. And I don't know. I think we're at a place where it's so magnificent, yet just with the tip, of going too far in the electronic direction, we lose all of this really true inner creativity.
Yeah. Yeah, it's true. There's lots of bells and whistles and distractions out there.
Mm-hmm.
Part of it feels like, to me, culturally, there isn't a lot of value put on poetry, for example, or dance or music or pottery or whatever, choose your creative genre.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And especially now, if you want to look to the leadership, the larger political and social order, which we probably don't want to look at that, but it's such a contrast, right?
Yeah, they ain't reading poetry, I'll tell you that right now. Or philosophy.
Administration, who really embraced creativity and embraced poetry, and that infiltrated into government too, right? Like, how do we make our government? How do we use our creativity to enhance our democratic processes?
Yeah.
And all that has just been completely abandoned and thrown out the window. Yeah. But it's still there. It's still there. Mm-hmm. And I think most people in America value and see that, value the arts. They value these aspects. All this other, all of the violence and the racism and the white supremacy stuff, all that stuff is, it's a lot of noise. It's a lot of clatter. It's like, look at us over here. We're just, we want attention too. And then the media goes rushing over. I don't want to go down this road. But anyways, it's there. It's pervasive. Mm-hmm. Poetry is pervasive. It's the core, divine basis of being.
Yeah.
Really.
Well, I know we've talked about, and certainly a lot what Nick and I work on, is the reason we're here is to divinely manifest and divinely express. Mm-hmm. Otherwise, why would we be on this planet if we weren't to create and to express? And there's such gifts. And I think that the more our creative genius is used, the better we can solve problems and work our way through awkward conversations or see the divine spark in another human, when there's a contentious moment. So yeah, it's really beautiful. Share a bit. I know you teach at Omega, you're at Esalen and many other places. What does it look like to actually do a retreat or workshop with you? How are those structured?
Oh, it looks like a whole lot of fun. If I may say so. Actually, we're doing a really fun thing at Shambhala Mountain Center in northern Colorado coming up in September with the great Susan Piver and Lodro Rinsler, who, speaking of New York City, has a mindfulness organization there in New York. Anyways, it looks like alternating between meditation practice, sitting, standing, walking meditation, alternating with writing practice. And I get pretty heavy into various prompts and ideas around just kicking people's innate creativity back into activity mode. These little reminders and lessons and writing ideas, and then I let them just go with their work and explore and experiment and celebrate and connect. We do a fair amount of sharing of our work and creating community and support around the writing, because it takes a lot of courage.
Yeah,
it really does, to reconnect with that and to write out what's inside of you. Feel okay sharing that with the world. That takes a lot of courage.
Yeah, it's very vulnerable, right?
Exactly.
Yeah, I've always found that it really is like, here's this thing that you kind of like pour your heart and your soul into, and it's you feel like I don't know, I'll just speak for myself, is sometimes I feel like afraid that it's going to be misunderstood or nobody will get it, or, like all these weird stories that go through, they're going to make fun of me, or, all those kinds of things. Like, it is a very, very vulnerable space.
It's true. Yeah. And so I like to approach it from the generative perspective instead of the critical perspective. There's a whole Masters of Fine Arts industry out there, which is based on critique. And which is helpful at a certain point in the writing practice or any creative endeavor. But really what's, the gateway is the generative practice of just getting to that point where we're okay expressing, getting the work down. And then we can worry about editing and critiquing later. We don't do any of that critique stuff in my workshops. We're there to celebrate people's expression, and that's a really powerful point of launching, because I've been there. I have an MFA in actually visual arts and photography, and I used to sit through these 3-hour critiques and just get hammered by people I didn't even know.
Oh, don't we know that, Nick?
Oh man, it's a brutal process. You lay it all out, and then they're so seldom that you ever hear in that model. You just don't hear like, oh yeah, and then this was really wonderful, and I loved how you did this and that and that and that. It's always like, no, it could have been this and it could have been that, and you want to do this and you want to do that, and it's like, oh, it's like so heavy.
Or they say things like, it's too decorative, or whatever. Like, there's this whole like art school or writing school speak that can be pretty damaging.
Yeah.
If it's not held well. And I do think there are some MFA teachers out there who know how to hold these kind of critique groups well. So I do want to honor that possibility, but I do think it's pretty rare.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Well, I think that goes beyond that into a more of a human problem, where, where we were trained just through our upbringing, through our schooling, to look for problems.
Yes.
We're not really trained to look. We're certainly not trained to really look for solutions. We're trained to look for problems. But in beyond that, even is to think that that's really going to help. Like, we're not really. How do I want to say? It's like we're not really taught to hold the space of possibility. We're not really taught that, there's going to, inside of that problem that you're so fixated on, there's actually a solution like right there, but you're so focused on the problem that you're not going to find that. So it's just, and looking for all that around, so that I think that translates into how we see other humans. It translates to how we relate to our work. It's just pervasive in so many ways.
Right.
I'm so glad you used that term, possibility, because I write about this in the book, how poetry is the language of possibility. And in my workshops, everyone gets an affirmation bracelet when they land. And in order to activate their creative genius, they have to wear their bracelet. and their bracelet says, I am a field of possibility.
That's awesome.
And it really, and we do this whole little ritual around it where we recite it internally and then we recite it externally out loud to the group. And I really think it sets this tone for the sessions where people start thinking about the possibility of like, oh, well, maybe I can do this and I'm going to allow myself to do this. And, when they get regular encouragement and celebration instead of critique and problem, it's amazing what happens, right?
Yeah.
It's magical.
Totally.
It's a magical transformation in my mind.
Absolutely.
It's like just a miracle.
Totally.
Yeah. And it really supports, it's, Nick, you and I talk about this all the time on the podcast too, but it supports our divine nature, this limitlessness that we actually are rather than limited. Mm-hmm. And for history and eons, there have been certain structures of organizations that so want to put humankind in a box. Because when humans arise into their full potential, it can really get scary for people who are trying to control us.
Uh-huh.
So I love that. It's like,
I was just talking with a lady today, and that was really, it was just such a focus on all the reasons that she couldn't. And it was shocking to me. I forget sometimes that I know I used to think that way as well. Like I just by, that's just how I was kind of taught, it's like, this is just the way it is. And all of these things and all of these obstacles seem to have crystallized in such a way that her mind couldn't do anything but prove why they were valid. And I was just fascinated by that. I was like, that is so interesting. And the more I inquired, what I found very interesting in this particular instance was that the more I inquired around it, the more agitated she became with me. She did not like the questions, but it was really simple questions about like, well, why do you believe that? Like where did that come from? And that was a very frustrating process for her. So I imagine that breaking down some of those walls, those really kind of solid seeming belief systems of I'm not creative or I can't because is part of that process as well. Like how does that come out in what you do?
Yeah. Well, what's that quote? Argue for your limitations and they become your reality.
Yeah.
So true.
Like that. A lot of it comes with the silence and with the meditation and returning over and over again. Repetition is such a powerful thing. Because I honestly never thought in a million years that I could write a book, finish a 300-page book. It seemed like this gargantuan thing for smarter people, more intellectual people with more discipline, more this, more that, blah, 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 blah. And you overcome that through practice, through re-identifying yourself with possibility over and over and over and over again. What's Jack Kornfield always talks about this thing, the mind is kind of like a puppy where he wanders off the newspaper and pees on the floor, and then you pick him up and you put him back on the newspaper, and he wanders off and pees on the floor, and then you pick him up and put him back on the newspaper. Like our minds are always doing this. They're always going back to the habitual thought patterns. I'm not enough. I could never do this. I'm blah, blah, blah. We want to seem to argue for our limitations. And yet when I just try and live more and more as that field of possibility, like really just model that, be that. Don't talk about it because it's not, you can't really talk about it and say, come on, just see that, be that right now.
Yeah.
But when you're a model for it and you're around people who really live that, it's remarkable. And you start to think like, what makes them really that different from me? Especially given my story and what I just thought I was such a piece of shit for so long. How did I make that transformation? That must be possible for everyone. Right.
Yeah.
And there's stories much more profound than mine. You hear these stories of Sudanese children who are given guns at the age of 12 and seen their entire families massacred in front of them. And they make it somehow on a boat to America. And they survive and they live and they thrive and they create their own families. It's not that the trauma's not still there, but it's that they realize a deeper identity for themselves.
Right. That's beautiful. Wow, that's so great. Well, either the book is coming out, right? So what
Friday.
Structured Friday. Okay, awesome. And we'll have that link for everybody in the show notes. But talk a little bit about how you went from retreat workshop into the book.
Well, the book actually comes out of the retreats.
Okay, so you've been doing these retreats for a while, right? And then
it's been about 7 years now. Because I made a transition from teaching kids for a long, long time to running a home care company for 7 years. That's a whole nother story.
Right.
To then teaching adults through this Writing as a Path to Awakening program. And so I started thinking about, is this just a workshop? What else is there? Is there an online course? Is there a book here? And so I started just being a book and a writer person, I thought, well, I could write this into a kind of a narrative. And so I started working with the proposal. I'd never written a book proposal for a nonfiction book. And so I was like, how do you do this? And so, you Google like how to write a nonfiction book proposal. And then it turns out the guy who runs the San Francisco Writers Conference is an expert at book proposals.
Right.
And so I ended up connecting with him and just learning about how to write a book proposal. And I put it together and started sending it out, and worked with a publisher for 8 months who ended up rejecting it.
What?
Yeah, I don't understand. We still don't understand that, but it's all good, right? There's never a bad thing that happens. I was devastated at the time, but then I just dusted myself off and, put the proposal into 5 more envelopes. And that's when I connected with Sounds True.
That's so great.
They loved
Sounds
it.
True.
Same proposal.
Awesome. Yeah.
They loved it.
So great.
So,
yeah.
I was just going to say, we would need to use the energy of quote unquote rejection in this process to drive us forward, not set us back.
I love that because, we so easily as humans can label something as bad, but the rest of the path has not yet unfolded, right? And so when we see beyond, you're like, oh, no, that wasn't like, now you're with Sounds True and they're awesome. And, they're going to fully support. Yeah.
Meant to be.
Yeah, that is so great. Well, we'll definitely have the link for that in our show notes. We're going to have a link towards your site for upcoming workshops. I know, Nick, I have my favorite question to ask. Is there anything else you wanted to share or ask before we sign off here?
More than anything, I just wanted to kind of expand on that last point because, we're talking with Albert, who is, truly skilled. Like like the repetition, the way that you mentioned repetition and just doing, these things again and again, not in a rote kind of way, but continually coming back to the foundation of getting quiet and allowing from that space. Like that is what creates mastery. And just because somebody doesn't acknowledge that right off the bat, it's like that's the place where so many people will stop. And I just think at the end of the day, it's, all those little quote unquote failures along the way are just one more no or one more step towards, the ultimate yes. And it's just so easy to quit. So easy to quit when we get frustrated around it, and that's the place where it's really important to just stay in the game and remember why the heck you're doing it in the first place. That's what really helps.
There's a fun little story about my TEDx failure in the book, quote unquote failure, and that's all I'll say about that.
I remember that. It's so weird. That was it's in both books, right? Or is it
no, because this was after after Beamish Boy came out.
I think you told me the story. So yes, everyone, you're going to have to buy Writing as a Path to Awakening just to hear this story.
It's pretty great story.
It was a great story. You shared it with me. Well, there's a question I love to ask, and I think maybe I've asked you this before, but is there anything that you desire to do that you've not shared with anybody? It's in, on that list, that bucket list, and you haven't really talked about it yet.
Oh, like in my life?
Mm-hmm.
Creatively?
Anything like that you were just like, I really want to do this one day, but you haven't told anybody.
Oh God, I tell everybody everything.
You're one of those. So easy.
Well, hence the memoirist, right?
That's right.
Let's see. Well, publicly, I haven't really, silly things like I want to live in Europe for a year.
There you go. Yeah.
What's that?
That's awesome.
Does that work?
That works. Live in Europe. Any particular city?
Well, I do have an affinity for Rovinj, which is in Croatia.
Oh, nice.
It's on the Istrian Peninsula. And I did get a chance to go there. And I would love to go back. It's just so sublime.
Oh, so be it.
And if I could, an absolutely brilliant novel.
I think so.
Rovinj. But yeah, travel is big on my list. For, mountain biking in Iceland. I do. There's certain people that I want to spend time with, eat, like Michael Bernard Beckwith, for example, to hang out with him.
Beautiful soul.
I recently met Lisa Nichols in Spain.
Oh, cool.
Actually.
Oh, nice.
Which was really fun. She lives down near you guys, right?
That's what I thought. Yep. I think she's in San Diego. Mm-hmm.
She's just lovely, an amazing speaker.
Yeah.
And we were on this thing together. And anyway, she's phenomenal. But those are kind of some of the things.
That's great. Those are cool things.
Very cool.
I love it. Yeah. Well, my dear, thank you so much for being on the Illumination podcast. This is a real treat. I know our listeners are loving the creativity. Nick, I know that we do. Any last words, Albert, to our people listening?
I think just the last thing is just never underestimate the power of silence and the power of looking inward. That devotion to yourself, I think, is
that's beautiful,
crucial. And I absolutely adore you two. I so appreciate knowing you, and thank you so much for the opportunity to connect in this way.
For sure. Thank you so much. And I'm sure you'll be back. So have a really beautiful rest of your day, Albert.
I will. Blessings.
Okay. Namaste.
Namaste.
Hey, thanks for jamming with us today. And if you enjoy Illumination Podcast, please go ahead and share it with someone you love. Give us a rating, review, download our podcast. And remember, you can find us at illuminationacademy.net/podcasts. Talk to you soon. Namaste.